Here's where we stand in Georgia. It's on the mind of the whole nation. Voters there participated in two crucial runoff elections yesterday, which will decide which party controls the U.S. Senate. CBS News now projects that Democrat Raphael Warnock has won his race, but his opponent, Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, has not conceded.
I am going to the Senate to work for all of Georgia. No matter who you cast your vote for in this election.
We got some work to do here. This is a game of inches. We're going to win this election. We're going to save this country.
So meanwhile, the other race between Democrat Jon Ossoff and Republican David Perdue, well, that still remains too close to call. I mean, razor thin. Adam Brewster is following all of this from Atlanta. I'm so glad you are here to join us. So I guess the first big question is, we know the outcome of one race, even though the opponent has not conceded yet. When do we expect to have results for perhaps the other race? Which counties are still outstanding? Almost all the votes are in, so why is it still too close to call?
Well, it's a very tight margin in that race between Senator David Perdue, the Republican, and Democrat Jon Ossoff. We'll see counties get back into counting. Things that are mostly left at this point appear to be absentee ballots, maybe a handful of early in-person ballots. Some of the counties that we're watching, it's a lot of Democratic areas that we're expecting votes to come in from. That is the big place that a lot of people have their eye on still is DeKalb County. They're going to have to feed in ballots by hand into the scanners because of a technical issue there. Fulton County stopped last night. They're going to reconvene this morning. And you may recall, Anne-Marie, we got through, about 99% of the the ballots in November. But because the race was so close between President Biden and President Trump, those final ballots took several days, and that's what dragged it out. It wasn't that we were waiting on large numbers. It was that the numbers were so tight, and those final numbers took a little while to push through. So we should see people get back into action this morning and seeing some results come in throughout the day.
Listen, you mentioned a bit of a technical problem in DeKalb County, considering all the allegations that we heard from the president about errors and bad form and fraud. Do we know any more about what happened that's causing this delay there?
We don't at this time. We just do know that it's going to cause them to have to hand feed in those ballots and get those last. It was about 19,000 was the update that they gave us last night, was the number of ballots that were left that they said they were going to have to manually scan along the way.
Okay. It's good. Just let everyone know everything's sort of on the up and up. They talk about transparency. We got transparency here. In the days leading up to the election, though, both President Trump and President-elect Joe Biden campaigned in Georgia. While there, Mr. Trump continued to claim that the presidential election was rigged, despite multiple court rulings to the contrary. So how do voters on the ground in Georgia feel about the integrity of this election and of the presidential election, for that matter? And do we know if, the president's sowing these sort of seeds of doubt, whether or not that has had an impact on the election there now and the way they feel about the race?
Well, about 7 in 10 voters said they thought the counting would be accurate in this upcoming election. That's a lower number than thought the counting would be accurate going into the November election. So there does seem to be a drop in faith and accuracy, but that is mostly driven by the fact that Republicans seem to have lost confidence in their election system. And we know about most voters think 2020 was fair, but it was the Republican side that tended to think the election was not fair. And this came up regularly on the campaign trail from Republicans and their supporters. The candidates frequently said, and the surrogates when they came to town, you can be upset about the November election. We're upset about the November election. We all have questions. But the thing that we need you to do is we still need you to show up and vote, because you not voting only helps the Democrats, and we all do not want the policies that the Democrats are pushing and that they want to enact. So we need you to show up. And conversations with voters at events, they typically said, yeah, I have questions about November. I don't think it was accurate. I don't think it was fair. You've heard some people say that they think President Trump won this state. Of course, we know that's not true. There's been 3 separate counts of that presidential election, but said they still voted anyways because they thought it was the only thing that they could do. So it was top of mind. And in terms of the impact of the race, it certainly may have convinced some Republicans to stay home if they did not believe that the election was going to be a fair process and wasn't something they wanted to participate in.
So this is sort of interesting because typically these types of elections, these runoff elections, get far fewer people showing up than, of course, show up for the presidential election. But things are a little bit different. Very early on, we could see that the numbers were going to be breaking records for this runoff election. Voter turnout, a huge factor. Our CBS News exit poll shows that voters who didn't vote in November but did participate in this election showed more support for Democratic candidates. So I want to ask you about, what are some of these polls telling us, but also about the demographics. Who has been making the biggest difference when it comes to showing up to the polls and voting this time around?
Well, so starting with those people who didn't vote in November and did vote in January, we knew that, even through Monday, there were more than 100,000 of those people. I met 2 of them yesterday while I was out speaking to voters at polls. One woman who voted for the Democratic candidates and a man in the evening who voted for the Republicans. And we know that Democrats made a significant effort, a significant push, partly because Senator David Perdue got more votes than Jon Ossoff did during the November election. And Perdue didn't hit that 50% majority threshold needed to avoid the runoff election, but Democrats knew that they had work to do if they were going to surpass the support Perdue received in November. Now, in terms of the demographics through that early voting, we knew that there were a larger share of black voters compared to early voting than November. There were a higher share of black voters who participated in or slightly higher than who participated in the Senate races in November, but it was also the support for the candidates. The Democratic Senate candidates received a higher percentage of support from black voters than President-elect Biden did. That is certainly a key demographic in what impacted this race. Of course, you can't look past the history of Reverend Raphael Warnock as the projected winner and going to the U.S. Senate from the state of Georgia. Young voters also stronger support for the Democratic candidates, a smaller share of the electorate in exit polls than they were in November, but a more solid share for the Democratic candidates. They played a role too, and of course we do know that some of those people are probably people who turned 18 since Election Day. Not that may be huge swaths of people, but some of those folks might be out there.
Yeah, all good factors to consider. We're, of course, going to continue talking about this all day long. Adam, thanks for joining us so early.